the young dudes. Sirius's Perspective by Rollercosterwords. Chapter 46. Third Year, The Slug Club. Monday, the 8th of October, 1973. Sirius, you better come up with the replacement words. You're the most, verbose, Sirius suggested, yawning. Loquacious? Garrulous? Exactly, Remus grinned. I'll work on figuring out a spell we'll need. And James, you can figure out how exactly we'll manage to cast it on the old house. I think that's going to be really hard. Peter, you better help with that. Hark at Mooney, James laughed as he reached for another slice of toast. Giving the orders now? The Marauders are a socialist utopia, Sirius yawned again. We don't have leaders. Enjoying Muggle studies, are you, Black? Remus teased, quirking an eyebrow. Sirius was too tired to respond, laying his head on the dining table and flipping 2 fingers at Remus as he closed his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping well. Nightmares all weekend, dreams that slipped from his mind like oil when he awoke, leaving only greasy impressions. A snake hissing, his brother's smile, the trickle of blood down the back of his legs. The kinds of things that their divination professor would have had a field day with. He heard the flutter of wings and the soft thud that meant an owl had landed on the table, but he didn't bother to open his eyes. It wasn't his. He barely even had one anymore. His parents had confiscated it and never returned it last spring. There was the sound of paper tearing, and then... What the hell? James murmured, sounding utterly confused. The Slug Club. Oh yeah, Sirius cracked an eye open. I got one too. Apparently all sluggy like students who have a certain star quality. So me, obviously. And I suppose you too. Privately, he suspected that Slughorn had not yet received the memo that Sirius might not be the Black Heir for much longer. His family name seemed to be the only thing that the old professor was really interested in. Neither Peter nor Remus had received an invitation. Sirius wasn't surprised about Peter, but he thought the fact that Remus wasn't invited meant that the professor's claim that the club was for especially gifted students was blatantly false. Remus got some of the top grades in the year. All Slughorn cared about was power, just like every other Slytherin. We won't go then, James said decisively. All for one and one for all, as Marauders. Sirius made an assenting noise. He really didn't mind either way. He just wanted to sleep. I don't care, Remus said. Go if you want to. I bet Lily's going. The word Lily had the predictable effect on James. He perked up immediately, saying, Do you? Yeah, she's really good at potions, isn't she? His voice had taken on a mildly dreamy quality. She's really good at everything. Probably the cleverest in the year. Oi! Sirius and Remus said in unison. James raised an eyebrow. Cleverest girl, then. Sirius nodded, satisfied, and closed his eyes, doing his very best to nap for the remainder of the meal. Tuesday, the 11th of October, 1973. The party was held later that week, on a Thursday, which Sirius found odd, as they still had classes in the next morning. Clearly, Professor Slughorn expected his guests to be so delighted at the opportunity to dine with him that they shouldn't care. Even though Sirius wasn't planning to spend his evening doing homework anyway, the presumption still irritated him. James was uneasy about the party too, although his hesitance was less about the discomfort with the professor and more about the guilt over leaving their other friends. He offered Peter and Remus the invisibility cloak, suggesting that they tag along in secret. Sirius seconded the idea. 2 invisible marauders would provide all sorts of opportunity for mischief. But Remus looked affronted, insisting that he really didn't care about the stupid party. Peter, who had been on the verge of agreeing to go, changed his mind as he saw Mooney's scornful expression. So it was only him and James, later that evening, who had to don their ridiculous dress robes. Sirius felt more uncomfortable than he cared to admit, staring at himself in the mirror. He had only ever worn formal attire to galas or dinners hosted by his own family and other purebloods. Putting them on at Hogwarts felt somehow tainted. The luxurious material and spidery thread connected him back to the tangled web of the Black family manor. He frowned at his reflection, annoyed that Slughorn was requiring them to dress up, as if they should be honoured to be in his presence. It was just a bloody dinner. The old man was such a typical Slytherin, overly preoccupied with appearances. Like having a group of children put on fancy clothes would make him feel more important. Sirius straightened his tie, asking anxiously, Do you think they'll be dancing? If the professor was requiring formal wear, who knew what else he'd been expecting them to do? But James just shook his head. Nah, he smoothed the comb uselessly over his hair. We'd have been told to bring partners or something. Sirius slouched over the bed, groaning. I hate stuff like this. Mooney, you go for me. I bet old Sluggy won't even notice. Fat chance, Remus snorted from behind the cover of his impossibly thick book. Verbal assault, defensive tongue twisters. Slughorn can't even remember my name half the time. And I bet he'll feel a bit short-changed when he's expecting a pureblood black and he gets the half-blood kid that he keeps calling Linchpin. Ugh, he's such a slimy tosser. Like an actual slug. Sirius smirked at the vivid image that it evoked, nudging Remus to make sure he'd heard him. Hey? An actual slug, Moony. Remus glanced up from his book, smiling. Are you ready then? James said, tossing the comb away with a defeated sigh. His hair was no less unruly than it had been 20 minutes ago, when he'd started attempting to flatten it. Suppose, Sirius muttered, getting to his feet slowly. He would much rather stay in the dorm with Remus and Peter, but he couldn't let James enter the lion's den alone, or viper's nest, more like. Slug's parlour? Lupin stood, too. I'll come down with you, he said, stretching. Might as well go to the library. You want to come, Pete? Peter looked at him as if he'd gone mental, shaking his head vehemently. The three of them left him behind in the dorm, making their way down to the common room. Much to Sirius's dismay, Lily Evans was at the bottom of the stairs, waiting for them in a flouncy turquoise dress. James immediately stood a little straighter, smiling broadly, but it wasn't him she was waiting for. Remus! She called, standing. You look nice, Evans, James said in that horribly dreamy voice. Sirius sighed. I want to speak to Remus, she sniffed, ignoring James completely. Will you walk me to the party? Not going. Remus shrugged. Not invited. Oh. Lily flushed, realising she'd put her own foot in her mouth. Sirius felt a twist of satisfaction. Sorry, I just assumed... What do you want to talk about? What did you want to talk about? Remus asked impatiently. It was never a good idea to stand between him and his beloved books. Sirius watched, not sure whether to be amused or annoyed, as Lily eyed him and James. Clearly, whatever she'd wanted to say couldn't be said in front of the two lowlives such as them. He rolled his eyes as she chewed on her lip, gaze darting helplessly back to Remus. He sighed, finally taking pity on her. I'm going to the library. If you want to walk that way with me, then fine. It wasn't very frivolous. The library was in the opposite direction of the dungeons, which could very well make Lily late, but Remus didn't even wait for a response before pushing through the portrait hole, and after a moment the redhead scampered after him. Sirius watched them go, shaking his head. James sighed as they stepped through the portrait hole, saying, You could be a bit nicer to her. Who? Lily? Sirius shot him an incredulous look. Mate, she treats you like dirt on the bottom of her shoe. Yeah, he said with another wistful sigh. But did you see her dress? Sirius snorted. He didn't think he would ever understand James's obsession with the girl. Why bother with a bird who wouldn't even give you the time of day? Besides, Lily wasn't even fun. All she did was play teacher's pet and spout holier-than-thou lectures. As they walked towards the dungeons, James got a contemplative expression on his face. What do you reckon Moony's secret is? What? Moony's secret? How come she likes him? He's a marauder, too. Sirius scratched his head. He wondered why Remus was friends with Lily, but he'd never thought about it the other way around. Dunno, mate. I think they became friends when they worked on that potions assignment together. And I suppose they've just got runes, and then they like to study. Maybe you just have to become a swot. James groaned and Sirius laughed, slinging his arm around his friend's shoulder. Oi, don't worry, you've still got me. The party was just as bad as Sirius had expected. It was a small group. Professor Slughorn had only gathered 9 students. Sirius, James and Lily were the only Gryffindors. There were 3 Slytherins as well. All upperclassmen that Sirius vaguely recognised as members of some of the older, more prestigious pureblood families. Henrietta Edgecombe, a 5th-year Ravenclaw whose great-grandfather was rumoured to be part of the Wisingamot, was also there, along with another Ravenclaw, Isaac Goldstein. Sirius was pretty sure he'd had an uncle who was someone important in the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry. The only Hufflepuff in attendance was Isadora Finch, whose one credential seemed to be the fact that she was fabulously wealthy. Sirius felt incredibly awkward, milling about in the potion master's private quarters. Slughorn had ushered them into a sort of parlour room, furnished with uncomfortable velvet sofas and draped in Slytherin colours. There was a small table littered with hors d'oeuvres and pumpkin juice, which he encouraged them to partake in. Please, boys, help yourself. Dinner will be served shortly. For now, feel free to mingle. Let's all get to know each other a bit better, shall we? Sirius hated the greasy smile on Slughorn's face, and how his eyes flicked about the room, following the students the same way someone might catch a butterfly he's about to pin to a board. Luckily, Lily's breathless arrival distracted the old man, and Sirius and James were able to slip away. Sirius frowned at the Slytherins, who were huddled in a corner, eyeing the other students judgmentally. None of them looked particularly impressed with the crowd Slughorn had gathered. When they caught sight of him, one of them nudged the others, whispering something that made them all snicker. Sirius flushed. He wished that he and James had just blown off the whole thing. James tried to catch Lily's eye once Slughorn had released her, but she turned her nose up and marched over to talk to Isadora. James looked like he had half the mind to follow her, but Isaac Goldstein came over and struck up a conversation about the previous weekend's Quidditch game. Apparently he was best friends with one of the Ravenclaw chasers. Professor Slughorn bolstered around the room, chatting enthusiastically with his pupils and introducing them loudly to each other. "Miss Finch, have you had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Parkinson? I attended his mother's solstice gala last summer. Quite the hostess, Lady Parkinson is." "Ah, Mr. Goldstein. I see you know Mr. Potter. I wouldn't be surprised if this one ends up playing in the league the second he finishes his newts. You know, one of my former pupils is now the coach of the Kenmere Kestrels. Oh, my dear Miss Edgecombe, you simply must say hello to Miss Evans, one of the brightest students I've ever had the pleasure to teach. Great things in this one's future, I'm sure. Yes, great things." Sirius hovered sullenly behind James, hoping desperately that Slughorn wouldn't single him out. He had a pretty good idea of how the old professor would introduce him to the others, and he couldn't stand the thought of someone bringing up his family name. Not after what Snivelus had said. He turned to the horse Devourus, needing something to do with his hands. He began sipping a glass of pumpkin juice absent-mindedly. He scanned the table of food, bored, noting the tiny sandwiches and pile of grapes, and the little cubes of cheese and jelly slugs. Jelly slugs? He blinked, taken aback. For a moment, he thought they were real slugs, but upon second glance he was clear that they were just candy, little wobbling desserts. He grimaced in disgust, unsure of whether the potions professor had thought it was such a good idea to go all in on the slug theme. And then inspiration struck. He nudged James, who was now standing in the circle with Goldstein, Edgecombe, and Evans. The three of them were discussing the properties of Felix Felicis, a liquid luck potion, and James was pretending to understand, nodding along sycophantically with everything Lily said. "Psst! Oi, Potter!" Sirius hissed, tugging on his friend's sleeve. James shot him a look, but he persisted, pulling his friend back from the circle. "What?" Sirius nodded towards the table of refreshments, whispering, "Look." James glanced over and turned back to him annoyed. "Oh, what?" "Just look," Sirius insisted, and then, lowering his voice even more, "the slugs." James' eyes went wide, and he realized what his friend was getting at. He turned back around, grinning, and raised an eyebrow. "Transfiguration spell?" Sirius nodded. "Transfiguration spell." Now James lifted both his eyebrows, eyes widening meaningfully. "Need any help?" Sirius flicked his head towards the other students, acting as though he was brushing some hair out of his face. "Just make sure they're distracted." James nodded. "Got it." He moved back to his previous spot, rejoining the conversation with Lily and the Ravenclaws. Sirius casually sat next to the fireplace, sipping his pumpkin juice. With his other hand, he had slid it into the sleeve of his robes, making sure no one could see as he whispered the spell under his breath. The slugs began to twitch. Unfortunately, it was at that moment that Slughorn called the room's attention, declaring that it was time for dinner. With a flourish of his wand, one of the velvet couches transformed into a large mahogany table, completed with 10 stiff black chairs. Professor Slughorn seated himself at the head of the table, beckoning them all to sit down. They got about 10 minutes into the dinner before all hell broke loose. Sirius wasn't quite sure if he'd done something with his spell, or if the slugs just naturally had reproduced so incredibly quickly. But when he glanced over at the table, he nearly choked on his drink. It was covered in slugs that were, for some reason, extremely fast-moving, for as he watched as they crawled down the table and over to the floor, little eye antennae waving as they set off to explore. Sirius bit his lip, trying to stop himself from laughing. This was going to be fun. It was almost 11 o'clock by the time they made it back to the common room. Lily Evans had marched ahead of them the entire way, clearly furious and refusing to acknowledge their presence. Sirius, she stomped off ahead of them, shimmering trails of slug slime glimmering on her dress. Luckily, James was laughing so hard that he didn't care about Lily's cold shoulder tonight. They had to stop and catch their breath before giving the password to the portrait hall. When they walked inside, Remus was in the common room, a book on his lap, as always. He grinned at them. "What did you do?" "It was all serious, mate," James said, still breathless with laughter. He clapped Sirius on the back, then bowed elaborately. Sirius returned the gesture, tossing his hair as he straightened up his back. "Couldn't have done it without you, dear chap." "Done what?" "Slugs." James wiped a tear from his eyes. "Slugs! Bloody everywhere. Started with those little jelly slug sweets that were laid out to eat." "Simple enough transfiguration spell," Sirius cut in, throwing himself into an armchair and slinging a single leg casually over one arm. "But then," James settled down next to Remus, "they just simply started to multiply. Is that why Evans is pissed off with you?" "Well, did you see the slimy bits on her dress? And, in her hair a bit too, I think. They were really fast-moving slugs. Like they kind of got everywhere." "No sense of humour, that one," Sirius yawned. "She ought to be thanking us for livening things up a bit." "The nerve of some people." Remus deadpanned. "See? You understand, Mooney." Sirius wiggled his eyebrows. "You'd let us slime you, wouldn't you?" Remus ignored him, turning to James instead. "So did Slughorn know it was you?" "Yeah, it was pretty obvious. We were the only ones not screaming." "Detentions?" 3 weeks. Cauldron scrubbing. That's fine. Helps build up my muscles." He flexed, which might have been incredibly impressive if he actually had any muscles to speak of. "Good news, though," Sirius put in, drawing Remus's attention back to him. "No more parties for us. We're out of the Slug Club." "And into the history books," James added, sending all 3 of them into fits of laughter. Chapter 47. 3rd Year. James Potter and the Lumpy Elephant Dung. Tuesday, the 30th of October, 1973. Remus, being the genius that he was, had cracked the code on their word-changing spell. Sirius had helped a bit, and James and Peter had tried to pitch in too, but at the end of the day it had mostly come down to Remus. Having to figure out the spell, he'd spent the remainder of October obsessively trying to perfect it, and with the Hogwarts Halloween feast right around the corner, he was in a frenzy. "It's fine, Mooney. We all know what we're doing," James assured him, when he returned from an evening Quidditch practice to find Lupin muttering to himself over one of his gigantic books. Sirius and Peter trailed in behind James, shaking water off their robes. They had gone out to watch the Quidditch practice and had gotten caught in the rain. With the sun setting earlier and the weather getting colder, Remus typically refused to join them. His spot on the bench had been happily taken up by Mary, who often tagged along to watch Marlean. At first, Sirius wasn't quite sure how to feel about this arrangement, but Mary had grown on him. She wasn't quite as whiny as Peter, and she would smile and nod attentively whenever Sirius leaned over to explain something about Quidditch to her. She was a very good listener. "I just think we should test it," Remus said anxiously. Sirius shook water droplets off his hair, casting a drying spell first on himself and then on James. "Oh no," Peter folded his arms. Sirius leaned over and tapped his shoulder with his wand, drying his robes too. "I won't be your guinea pig this time. Last time I didn't get rid of that patch of purple hair for weeks." "I'd forgotten about that," Sirius said, reminiscing. "That worked really well, once we figured out the kinks." "Do it on him," Peter shoved a finger at Sirius. "It's his turn." "Oh, don't whinge, Pete." Sirius rolled his eyes, flopping onto his bed. "Do it on me, Mooney. I'm not a coward." "All right, fine." Remus pointed his wand. Sirius scrambled to his feet. "Wait, you want to do it now?" "Well, sooner the better." "What about the counterjinx?" "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've got that sorted." The cryptic smile that spread across his friend's face was not even the slightest bit comforting to Sirius. "Oh, for goodness sake," James sighed, pulling off his Quidditch quit. "Do it on me, Lupin. I don't mind. I don't want to say any words on that awful list of yours. Can you do it for something else?" "If you like." Remus shrugged. "Yeah, about that list, Mooney." Sirius plucked it up off the bedside table, frowning. What? Well, it's really long. Yeah? Remus raised an eyebrow. What's your point? They're all insults for non-purebloods, aren't they? Well, yeah, Sirius hedged uncomfortably. Yeah, they are. But, well, I didn't think there were so many. I've never seen them written all out like that, anyway. Where did you hear all these? What do you think? Remus said, staring defiantly into his eyes. He lifted his chin a bit, challenging, as he said, Don't be a girl about it, Black. It doesn't bother me. Sirius looked back down at the list, feeling heat creeping into his cheeks. It might not bother Remus, but it bothered him. Were people really saying such nasty things to his friend? Right, James, what word do you want me to swap? Evans, Sirius suggested quickly, sick of hearing that word come out of his mouth. All right, Remus smiled. And change it to what? Don't tell me, James said. We can do a blind test to see if it definitely works. Pick something Black hasn't come up with yet. Remus nodded, grinning mischievously as he scribbled something onto a piece of parchment. His brow furrowed and he raised his wand, lip poking out in his typical expression of concentration. Sirius held his breath as Remus flicked his wand, muttering the incantation. All 4 boys stood, silently, staring at each other. Remus scratched the back of his neck. Did you feel anything? Nope. James looked down at himself, as if he were checking for any physical signs that the spell might have been cast. Well, say it then, Sirius urged. A full name, Remus added. James squared his shoulders, clearing his throat dramatically. He lifted one arm and crossed it over to place his hand on his heart, as though he were about to give some kind of speech. Lumpy elephant dung! He said it with such confidence that they all immediately dissolved into laughter. Peter was giggling so hard he almost fell off the bed, and Sirius found that he couldn't actually breathe. James flushed bright red, glaring at Remus. I didn't know you were going to pick something like that, he hissed. That's my future wife. Who's your future wife? Sirius asked innocently. Elephant dung, James replied automatically, and then immediately clapped a hand over his mouth. Lupin! You said you didn't mind, Remus replied, all business. Now, try saying Evans again. But really, really try to break my spell, okay? Elephant dung, James said immediately, and then with more force, Elephant dung. He screwed up his eyes. Elephant dung. Lumpy elephant dung. He gave up, staring dejectedly at the floor. Peter sounded like he was about to have a fit from laughing so hard, and Sirius was relying on his bedpost for support to keep himself up from collapsing. Excellent, Remus said, looking very pleased with himself. Hey, it's 6 o'clock. Should we go for dinner? Yeah, just do the counterjinx first, James said. Oh no, Remus shook his head, an impish twinkle in his eye. Sorry, Potter, but you wanted to test the spell thoroughly. We need to make sure it won't wear off too quickly. I'll, unjinx you tomorrow morning. What? James shouted, eyes bulging out of his head. Oh, yes! Sirius gasped, wiping tears from his eyes. Sorry, Remus said, with a shit-eating grin. Just be glad you didn't pick a common word, I suppose. But what if I run into elephant dung? Oh, I don't think you will, Remus smirked. Hardly any elephants in Scotland. James glared at him. You know what I mean. Lumpy elephant dung. Remus shrugged, nonchalant. Don't yell her name. Come on, I'm starving. James, look who it is. Shut up, James hissed through gritted teeth, eyes fixed on the dinner plate. Sirius tutted disapprovingly at his friend's lack of manners. That's no way to greet... Oh, what's her name? I'm not rising to it, you know. I'm stronger than that, James mumbled, hacking violently at his steak and kidney pie. Oh, but she's right there, mate, Sirius urged, delighted. How will she ever notice you if you don't call to her? Oi, Evans, Remus joined in, waving at the redhead. You want to sit with us? She stopped and studied them, narrowing her eyes. Why? You're a Gryffindor? We're Gryffindors? Sirius said, vacating his seat next to James to gesture to it, indicating that she should make herself comfortable. We're supposed to sit together. Plus, it'll be really Plus, it'll really bother Potter. Well, in that case, Lily sat down. Sirius nudged Remus over, settling beside him and across from the couple. Front row seats. Lily was giving James a scrolling look. The poor boy's entire face had gone tomato red. "Why do I bother you, Potter?" "You don't," he rushed to assure her. "They're just being prats." "Language, Potter," Sirius scolded, reaching across Remus for the gravy. "That's no way to speak in front of a lady." "What's going on?" Lily asked warily, turning to Remus. "Are you all making fun of me?" "We're making fun of James," Peter said eagerly, looking thrilled that for once someone else was at the butt of the joke. "I'm testing a spell on him," Remus explained. Lily raked her eyes across the group, still looking suspicious. "What's the spell?" "Mutate over vi." Her eyes widened comically. "Is that... Oh my god. Remus, which word?" Lumpy elephant dung," James said dejectedly. Peter choked on his pumpkin juice, dropping his fork to the ground. Lily released a nervous giggle. "Oh, what did you say, Potter?" Lumpy... He tried to fight it, looking as if he was battling his tongue for the force of the word. "Lumpy elephant dung. Lumpy." "Lumpy? Oh, for pity's sake!" Lily turned to glare at Sirius. "It's my name, isn't it?" "Don't look at me," Sirius said quickly, holding his hands up. "It was all Mooney's idea." Lily's frown dissipated as she turned to Remus, curious, like she hadn't even considered the possibility. "Really, Remus?" He suddenly looked guilty. Yeah, but it wasn't meant to be offensive or anything." "That's amazing," she gushed. "Really clever magic." Sirius felt a twinge of irritation at the way she fawned over Lupin. She'd been gearing up to lecture him, but once she found out it was Mooney's idea, oh well, then it was genius. "Wait until tomorrow," Peter said. "Wait until tomorrow," Peter said, wiping pumpkin juice off his face. Sirius kicked him under the table. Just because she was sitting with them didn't mean that they were about to start lecturing Evans on all of their plans. It wasn't as if she was a marauder. "I'm so sorry, Elephant Dung," James said morosely, with utmost sincerity. This time, even Lily laughed. Wednesday, the 31st of October, 1973. Nothing's happening. Well, they're not going to start just insulting each other, are they? We have to push them into it. Pete, go and... Oi, I'm a pureblood. Oh yeah, fair play. Mooney, go and trip one of them up with something. Do it to Snivelus, or my cousin. Yeah, get Sissy. No, Remus said firmly, shooting him a stern look. We'll just wait. Patience, Black. Patience. But it might take days. It won't, Mary said, with a dark look on her face. The three of you must be blind if you haven't seen what's going on around here. Sirius fell silent, ashamed. Apparently, he and Mary were friends now. She'd taken to sitting beside him, sometimes at meals. It was a bit strange. The girls usually kept to themselves, unless they were beckoned. But he supposed that Mary was already friendly with Remus, and she'd been spending quite a bit of time with him and Peter, watching Quidditch practices. Plus, he couldn't blame her for wanting to sit with the Marauders. He was sure his friends were far more interesting than Lily and Marlean. What's been going on, then? James asked, looking concerned. Do you get called that stuff, MacDonald? She shrugged, taking casual sips of pumpkin juice. It's been worse this year. You must know, Remus. Remus nodded absent-mindedly, still watching the Slytherins. Sirius looked back and forth between Mary and his friend, feeling disgruntled. He didn't really think much about the fact that Remus was a half-blood, except for how sometimes he didn't know obvious things about the wizarding world, or how he had an appreciation for Muggle music that the other boys lacked. It was disorientating to hear that there was an entire aspect of his life at Hogwarts that Sirius was simply unaware of. Mary and Remus spoke of the insults as if they were a part of everyday life that they just took for granted. So, James continued slowly, have all the Muggle-borns been getting it, then? Even Elephant Dung? Oh, for fuck's sake, Remus, please fix me. If you'll do my potions homework, Remus said quickly. with a wicked grin. "Fine, anything. I'll give you my bloody broomstick if you want. Just finito." Remus flicked his wand easily, turning back to the Slytherins. James opened and closed his mouth like a fish, shocked. Eventually he cleared his throat. "Lily Evans," he said carefully. His face immediately split into a wide smile. "Oh, what now, Potter?" Lily snapped irritably, turning from her conversation with Marlean. "Will you go out with me?" "No!" She spun back to her friend. "Cheers, Boony. Any time." "Wait," Sirius said. "Just wait a minute. The counterjinx was finite incantatem." "Yep." "But that's just a standard counterspell." Remus shrugged, looking very pleased with himself. "I never said it was anything difficult. You purebloods don't have an ounce of common sense between you." Mary laughed boisterously, and James choked on his roast potato, and Sirius leaned over to slap Remus on the back. "I swear, Moony, when it comes to evil schemes, none of us have got anything on you." Remus shook him off, blushing as he looked down at his dinner. "Look!" Peter cried suddenly, grabbing James's arm as he pointed at the Slytherin table. A second-year Hufflepuff had accidentally wandered too close to Mulciber, who had pushed his chair back and now stood looming over them. "Yes," Sirius whispered, on the edge of his seat. "Go on, you big troll." The poor Hufflepuff was a shaking leaf, sloshing their drink around on the front of their robes. Some of the liquid sprinkled onto the toes of Mulciber's shiny black shoes, and he bared his teeth in an ugly grimace. They all watched as the much larger boy reached out to grab the Hufflepuff by the tie, along with the rest of the Slytherins, who looked as if they were expecting a show. "Clean that up, you angelic sweetie pops." You could have heard a pin drop. The Hufflepuff had gone from terrified to confused, letting out a shaky laugh. Mulciber blinked, his beady little eyes stupidly. "What did you say, Mulciber?" Snape asked, staring at him. "Angelic sweetie pops," the Slytherin shouted, furious. "No, I meant darling sugarplum. No, goody gumdrops." At this point the entire hall had been consumed by riotous laughter. "Oh, bloody hell," Sirius muttered. "Mulciber's really got a mouth on him, eh? I didn't think he'd use half of those." "Sit down, you idiot." Snape grabbed his friend's sleeve, tugging him back down into the seat, looking almost as embarrassed as the larger boy. "That was brilliant, Sirius," Mary said, with a delighted smile and a happy little bounce. And then, to his surprise, she leaned over and enveloped him in a hug. Sirius had never been hugged by a girl before. He felt a spike of anxiety. Was he meant to hug her back? Where did he put his arms? What did he do with his hands? Was hugging just something girls did with their friends? With friends who were boys? Or was it something else? How was he supposed to tell the difference? Before he could make up his mind about whether to hug her back, Mary pulled away. Sirius covered his panic with a gallant toss of his hair, which he hoped looked cool and effortless, like getting hugged by a girl was no big deal, because he did it all the time. "Just wait," he said. "That was just the beginning." Chapter 48. 3rd year, Sirius turns 14. Friday, the 2nd of November, 1973. The Marauders were heroes, or celebrities, rock stars, whatever you wanted to call them. They had become very, very popular overnight. Sirius revelled in the attention, strutting through the halls with his head held high, grinning every time someone reached out to clap him on the shoulder. The Slytherins scowled, sure, but to every other student, the Marauders had earned a newfound level of respect and admiration. Sirius hadn't really considered the reformations of the prank when they had planned it. He'd mostly been focused on revenge, on humiliating the Slytherins, and stopping them from laughing at him behind his back. But clearly, it had meant much more to a lot of other students, particularly those who had Muggle parents. The insults that had been thrown around all year were suddenly silenced, replaced with sullen glares and pursed lips. Of course, some of the Slytherins fell into old habits, and for the first few days after Halloween, the occasional angelic sweetie pops or honey puffkins could be heard, but these were only met with hysterical laughter, leaving the speaker flushed with embarrassment. Sirius would forever treasure the memory of Severus Snape spitting that James Potter was a lovely little poppet when he lost his temper during a charms lesson on Friday. Sirius had collapsed on the floor, gasping in air as he took in both James and Lily's mortified expressions. What made the prank even better was the fact that none of the Slytherins could go squealing to any of the professors. Snape, in particular, had a history of tattling whenever something didn't go his way, and watching him seethe for the rest of their lesson delighted Sirius to no end. Because, of course, explaining the prank to a teacher would mean explaining which words had been changed, and although the Slytherins might be bold with their insults when they were unsupervised, none of them wanted the professors to catch on to what bullies they were. So the other three houses watched, amused, as the Slytherins tried to figure out the counter-curse by themselves. While seeing Snape humiliated certainly made Sirius's day, Snivellus was not his only target. Unbeknownst to the other marauders, Sirius had cooked up a special surprise as revenge for his darling little brother, and while he normally avoided Regulus in the halls, he found himself eagerly keeping an eye out on Friday, hoping for the chance to ambush the boy. Unfortunately, the opportunity never came. As the day wore on, Sirius comforted himself with the fact that it was his birthday tomorrow, which meant he could expect an invitation at some point before dinner. Although he normally dreaded the stupid family tea parties that his cousins had roped him into, he found that he was quite looking forward to one this year, if only because he knew he'd be able to spend the entire time tormenting Reg. He waited, expectantly, wondering if they'd deliver the note by owl. Part of him hoped that Regulus might invite him in person, not because he wanted to see his brother or anything. He just wanted to make sure that his extra addition to their spell had actually worked. But nothing came. There was no note, no cousin cornering him in the halls, no haughty, sneery face hovering outside the Gryffindor common room. Once he caught a glimpse of Narcissa on the third-floor corridor. She didn't even look at him, brushing past him as though he wasn't even there. By the time dinner came around, Sirius had come to the realization there would be no black family tea this year. And that was fine. He didn't care. It would have been stupid to expect one, since apparently his family had disowned him without even giving him the courtesy of a heads-up. In fact, he'd been hoping that he wouldn't have to go to their stupid tea party this year. He was relieved that they didn't try to invite him. He was delighted, yes, thrilled, that he wouldn't have to deal with his family on his birthday, that he wouldn't even have to see them. They clearly didn't want to see him. He was distracted at dinner, failing to even notice when Mary sat down next to him until she asked him about... He was distracted at dinner, failing to even notice when Mary sat down next to him until she asked him to pass the salt. He obliged, and she brushed her fingers against his, smiling. Sirius still wasn't quite sure what to make of Mary. He liked her well enough. He'd never be as close to her as he was with his marauders, but they were friends. But after that hug, he'd found himself second-guessing every interaction, trying to figure out if there was another layer of meaning. Was that a friendly smile, or did Mary fancy him? Trying to think about it with twisting his stomach into knots. How was he supposed to know? "What time you be free tomorrow, Black?" James asked, around a mouthful of crispy battered cod. "What do you mean?" Sirius asked, splashing vinegar over his chips. When he was done, he passed the bottle to Remus. He always doused his chips in vinegar. "Oh, you know. What time do you think Black family tea will be finished, for your birthday?" "Oh, Sirius. Is it your birthday?" Mary scooched a bit closer. "You never said. I would have got you something." "Would you?" Sirius frowned, puzzled. He never thought about getting Mary something for her birthday. He didn't even know when her birthday was. If you were friends with girls, were you supposed to buy them presents? Or was it different, exchanging gifts when it was girls and boys? Did it mean something more? He turned back to James, keeping his voice casual as he said, "I don't think the tea is happening this year. I haven't had a note." "Oh, really?" James blinked, clearly surprised. Is that okay?" Sirius snorted, staring down at his plate. Bloody Potter, always wanting to talk about feelings. "Why would it be? Like I give a toss." "Well, great then," James said, with a forced enthusiasm. "We can crack on with planning the messiest party Gryffindor Tower has ever seen." "Yeah," Pete chimed in. Sirius cringed internally. He didn't want a pity party, just because his friends had felt bad that his own bloody brother didn't want to see him on his birthday. He didn't care. He really, really didn't. "Am I invited?" Mary asked, sitting up straighter. Remus answered, drawling, "Obviously," with a surprising amount of sarcasm. "Everyone's invited." "Look, maybe don't make a big fuss," Sirius mumbled, pushing his peas around on his plate. "I don't feel like it much." "Oh, why not?" Mary pouted, batting her eyelashes. "It'll be fun. We'll make it as good as Remus's birthday last year. Even better." Sirius didn't have the energy to figure out how he was supposed to respond to that, so he just remained silent. He could feel his friends studying him, their worry like a thick fog. It only darkened his mood. The remainder of the meal was grim, eaten almost in total silence. Saturday, the 3rd of November, 1973. James woke him up bright and early, as he did every Sunday, except that day, instead of shouting his usual "Rise and shine," he did it with a serenade of happy birthday. Sirius smiled despite himself, yawning. "You know, mate, if you really wanted to make me happy, you could just let me sleep in a little bit longer." James laughed, tugging on his arm. "Oh, come on. I've got a surprise for you after practice. You'll like it, I promise." Sirius yawned again, but acquiesced. He had a pretty good idea of what the surprise might be, knowing James Potter, but his friends were so excited that he could hardly say no. As he got dressed, James tutted at Remus's still-shut bed curtains. Astonishingly, he managed to sleep through Potter's tuneless rendition of the classic Happy Birthday song. "Sleeps like the dead, that one," James said, shaking his head. "Come on, Peter, help me wake him up." "No, wait!" Sirius stopped them, glancing over at Remus's bed. He knew the boy would probably drag himself up if they asked him to, since it was his birthday, but he didn't want to force Remus to sit outside in the cold for 2 hours if he didn't want to. "Let him sleep," he said quietly to the other marauders. "You know he'll just stick his nose in a book anyway if we force him to come down." James shrugged, moving away from the drawn curtains. Sirius scrawled a quick note on their way down so that Remus wouldn't wonder where they'd gone when he finally did wake up. The air outside was bracing. It was a sort of chilly autumn day that flirted with winter, making Sirius wonder if he should have brought out his scarf. But the sky was clear and blue, perfect for flying, and the climbing sun promised warmer weather in an hour or two. He was surprised to see Mary, already sitting in the stands, shivering. As he and Peter moved to join her, she perked up. "Oh, thank goodness you're here!" She huddled into Sirius's side the moment he sat down, pressing her chilly fingers against his arm. He stiffened, surprised by the sudden contact, and cast a helpless look at Peter. The other boy was staring, wide-eyed, clearly just as clueless about the proper etiquette when a girl suddenly decides to give you a cuddle. "Sorry, you don't mind, do you?" Mary asked, smiling up at him. "I was freezing out here by myself, and you're so warm." She had a very nice smile. "No, it's all right," Sirius mumbled, not quite sure what to do with his arm. Eventually, he wrapped it carefully around Mary's back, letting his hand rest lightly on her shoulder. Mary sighed happily and leaned into his chest. Peter was still staring, bug-eyed. "Oh, happy birthday," Mary said widely, as if what was happening was entirely normal. Thanks." Sirius was hardly able to focus on the practice. His brain felt like it was spinning in circles and turning to mush. This definitely meant she fancied him, right? This wasn't just a friend thing, was it? Sirius supposed that he wrestled with James, and they even hugged, but he'd never cuddled. He couldn't imagine putting his arm around Peter to keep the boy warm. And Remus? Well, he supposed Remus was taller, so Sirius would probably have to lean into his chest, which honestly sounded like a better deal because it was so bloody cold outside. But that was even more confusing. And you couldn't bloody well tell with girls, could you? Because they were always cuddling with each other, and giggling and holding hands, and braiding each other's hair. Girls were just touchier. And Mary was the touchiest. She was always putting her hand on your arm to laugh, or grabbing your hand to pull you in, or telling you to reach out, and feel how soft her sweater was, or... Oh, bollocks, Sirius thought. Mary fancies me. He glanced down at her discreetly, and was mortified to find her looking up at him through her long lashes. Her lips curled into a lazy smile, as if she could see what he was thinking. Sirius turned back to the Quidditch pitch, quickly breaking eye contact. Okay, so maybe Mary fancied him. All right, that was fine. He could be happy about it. This was what all the older boys seemed to talk about at Hogwarts. Sirius knew that it was a mark of status if you could convince a girl to like you. The sign that you had passed some sort of test. So it was a good thing that Mary fancied him. It meant he was cool. But did he fancy her? Sirius had no idea how he was supposed to tell. Mary was nice and funny. She wasn't a swot like Lily, and she wasn't shy like Marlean. As far as girls went, she was quite a lot of fun to spend time with. And she was pretty, he supposed, with her corkscrew curls and her straight white teeth. But how was he supposed to tell the difference between being friends with Mary and fancying her? No one had ever explained it to him properly, and Sirius's stomach was like a sticky ball of nerves as he tried to figure it out. Putting your arm around a girl made you feel as though you might throw up. Did that mean you fancied her? By the time the Quidditch practice ended, Sirius was a mess. His thoughts kept spinning in circles without even reaching any sort of conclusion. He felt distinctly that he should be doing something about Mary, but he wasn't sure what. Luckily, James bounced over to the stands immediately after landing and pulled Sirius away, explaining excitedly that Madame Hooch had agreed to let them use the pitch before the Ravenclaw practice settled in about half an hour. Sirius suspected that James's surprise would have been something to do with Quidditch, so he wasn't actually at all surprised. Still, James took Sirius's fervent grin as a sign of enthusiasm rather than what it really was, relief that someone had extracted him from Mary and her cold hands. They bid farewell to the girls and took to the skies, where the only thing Sirius had to worry about was beating James in a race on the Quidditch hoops. The Marauders had decidedly ignored Sirius's plea not to make a big fuss. The common room was packed with laughing students as his record player was spinning frantically, and every lion motif in the room had been enchanted to roar every time somebody said the words birthday or Sirius. He was absolutely thrilled. Sirius had never been able to resist attention, and he basked in the glow of his classmates' congratulatory statements, the way a cat might recline in the sun. It was wildly entertaining to watch James's attempts to dance with Lily, which ended up with him tripping on the rug and nearly diving into the fireplace. When Mary pulled him in for "John, I'm only dancing," Sirius was wise enough to stay in his seat. He leaned in to whisper to Remus and Peter, "I only know the waltz, and I'll be fucked if I ever have to do that again." Peter was in the middle of explaining his predictions for the newest Chudley Cannons lineup when a sixth year with a curtain of silky black hair leaned over the back of the sofa. "You're Lupin, aren't you?" She stared down at Moony expectantly. Yeah." "My friend, Fira, says that you're selling—" yeah, come over here." Remus leapt to his feet, jerking his head towards a quiet corner in the room. Sirius watched as the girl followed him. Even though she was a good 3 years older, she stood several inches shorter than the weedy boy. "What do you think that's about?" Sirius asked, watching Remus conduct what appeared to be a very suspicious conversation. The girl looked a bit frustrated. "What?" Peter glanced over, annoyed that he'd been interrupted. "Oh, who cares? Minnie's always hanging out with girls now." Sirius hummed in agreement, squinting slightly as he tried, and failed, to read their lips. His concentration was interrupted by Mary, who plopped down on the couch next to him. "How's it going over here, then?" she asked cheerfully. Sirius settled into the cushions, shooting her a lazy grin. "Can't complain." He slung an arm over the back of the couch, the way he hoped would make him look cool. Mary looked as if she was about to say something else, but at that moment Remus returned. Sirius eyed him suspiciously as he retook his seat. "What's going on there, then, Moony?" He raised a sardonic eyebrow. "Not another girlfriend?" "Shut up." Remus kicked him. "Who's your girlfriend, Remus?" Mary asked quickly, sitting up a bit straighter. Remus frowned. "I don't have a girlfriend. Black's just been a dick." "Good." Mary slouched back into the cushions, wearing a smug little expression. "Because if you did, I know someone who would be very disappointed." "Wait, what? Someone fancies Moony?" Sirius supposed he shouldn't be surprised. Remus was always hanging around with girls now, but he insisted that they were just friends. He studied his friend's face, but Remus didn't look pleased at all by Mary's suggestive tone, muttering only, "Oh, okay." Sirius nudged Mary with his elbow. "Who fancies Moony?" It had to be Lily, right? Or maybe Marlean, or it could be someone else. But how many girls was Remus friends with now? "I couldn't possibly tell you." Mary grinned impishly, pretending to button her lips. Girls, Sirius groaned. Nightmares, the bloody lot of you. Mary mock-pouted, pushing her bottom lip out. Sirius smiled and shook his head before turning back to Remus, asking, "So, what are you selling? That girl said you were selling something." "Nope." Remus lied through his teeth. "She had the wrong person." Sirius felt a familiar thrill. Mooney has a secret. "I'll work it out, you know," he warned. "Not that I'm not grateful for the truly excellent birthday present," a nod at the Zonkos Deluxe practical joke kit on the floor, "but I'm going to figure out how you paid for it, eventually. I don't believe this stuff about a dead aunt leaving you money." "Your dead uncle left you money," Remus shot back. "Can't touch it till I'm of age, though, can I?" Sirius couldn't help smiling. "Nope, you're up to something, Lupin. I know you. You're not Mooney if you don't have a secret." "So let me have a secret, then," Remus said cryptically, a familiar mischievous light dancing in his eyes. Chapter 49. 3rd Year, Chrysalis. Friday the 9th of November, 1973. By the next weekend, Sirius was no closer to figuring out Mooney's secret. Between the strange encounter with the girl at his birthday party and Remus's obviously false story about inheriting money from his aunt, Sirius figured that his friend must be running some sort of underground business. But what? At first he thought it must have something to do with school. Maybe Remus was selling his notes or doing other students' homework for them. But it wouldn't make much sense for a 6th year to be looking for a 3rd year to help out with her assignments. So he scrapped that idea pretty quickly. His next thought was that Mooney must be making something. Maybe he was secretly selling love potions behind Slughorn's back. But that seemed unlikely, as it would be extremely difficult to brew potions secretly without the proper supplies, and besides, potions had always been one of Remus's weaker subjects. Unfortunately, Sirius wasn't able to conduct a proper investigation over the course of the week. He was too busy doing homework for classes, planning out pranks, and pestering James and Peter about their AUDIOBOOK project. James had completed the reading of his research, as promised, by the end of September, and then had promptly passed the sheaf of parchment off to Peter. Sirius spent quite a bit of time throughout October pestering the smaller marauder to just read faster, to no great effect. Peter struggled to stay on top of classes and do homework even more than the rest of them, and he worked through Sirius's AUDIOBOOK research at a snail's pace. Once both boys had finally finished reading, they had come back to Sirius with a list of questions. Peter mostly just wanted assurances that they wouldn't get into trouble, but James had actually pointed out a few conflicting pieces of information and areas that they would need to gather more details on if they wanted to make sure that this was something they could actually pull off. Remus reluctantly admitted that there were a few more details to work out before they approached Remus with the idea, but insisted that James and Peter actually help with the research this time. Of course, organising study sessions around 3 schedules was much more complicated than just going onto the library on his own, especially because they had to make sure Remus didn't catch on to their secret project, which meant waiting until Lupin was otherwise occupied to sneak off. Eventually, Sirius admitted that trying to force the other marauders to take on equal shares of the work was just slowing them down. He assigned James and Peter each specific parts of information to look into, and the 3 of them continued to do their research separately. That was why, on a sunny Friday afternoon, Sirius was sitting alone between the dusty shelves of the library. There was just one final question that James had insisted they needed to find an answer to, whether the Death Head's hawk moth chrysalis needed to be fresh, or if they could just use preserved ones, and Sirius was completely stumped. He knew that attention to detail was important when it came to potion making, especially with such sensitive magic as AUDIOBOOK transformations. But as he shut his 7th book, after yet another fruitless search for information, he was beginning to think that he would rather just take his chances with accidentally turning himself into a half-animal mutant. "Sirius!" The cheerful, familiar voice set his pulse kicking, and Sirius turned. Sure enough, caught sight of Mary and Marlean, arm in arm, making their way through the stacks. "MacDonald?" he nodded. "McKinnon?" Mary marched over, towing Marlean along with her. "What are you up to?" They hadn't really spoken since his birthday, though he still saw her in classes and at meals. She'd eaten dinner beside him every night that week, although there hadn't been a repeat of the confusing cuddling incident on the Quidditch pitch. Sirius had been trying not to think too much about his realization from the past weekend, although with the way she was smiling at him now, he was pretty sure that Mary fancied him. He just didn't know what he was supposed to do about it. Homework, he lied, flicking his hair out of his face. All by yourself? He shrugged, and Mary giggled. Want some company? Bloody hell. If you like. He was trying very hard to perfect a facade of smooth confidence, leaning back in his chair and shooting her a lazy smile. Marlean looked annoyed. But Mary, we told Lily that we'd... Oh, come on, Marles. Mary unlinked her arm, plopping down in the seat next to Sirius. Wouldn't want the esteemed Mr. Black to get lonely, would we? Marlean frowned. But Lily... You go and help her then. Tell her that we'll be along in a bit. Tell her that I'll be along in a bit. There was a moment of silence as the two girls exchanged a series of meaningful looks, which ended with Marlean sighing deeply. All right, she grumbled. But don't blame me if she's upset with you. She turned with a swish of her robes, leaving Mary and Sirius alone. His throat felt dry. He swallowed. Mary was looking at him expectantly, sending his thoughts into dizzy spirals. Sirius realized, with a sharp jab of unease, that this was the first time they'd ever actually been alone. So, Mary scooted in her chair a bit closer to his. What are you working on? Oh, nothing. Just something for potions. Potions, she giggled. Why was she always giggling? I thought you hated that class. I do, he groaned, looking down at the book spread in front of him. Just trying to find this one bloody ingredient, but it's impossible. What is it? Maybe I can help. Sirius threw her a doubtful look, but obliged. Deathhead's Hawk Moth Crystal. Deathhead's Hawk Moth... Mary frowned for a moment, thinking. Then suddenly her face split into a wide, sunny smile. Oh, I've read about those. Hang on. She dug into her bag, rifling through the papers and spare pieces of parchment. Sirius sat up a bit, watching skeptically. He had scoured every book he could find in the library. Was it possible that Mary had found something that he had already looked at? She pulled out a thick tome with a flourish, slamming it down in front of him. Sirius read the title. It was the Care of Magical Creatures textbook. In here, she said excitedly, flipping through the pages. Let me see. Yes, Chapter 9. Magical Insects and Arachnids. She pushed the book in front of him. Sirius grabbed for it, feeling a spark of hope. He scanned the pages eagerly, devouring the words with such ferocity that he hardly even noticed Mary leaning in to read over his shoulder. The section on Death's Head Hawk Moths was a short expert, just one page. At first, it seemed to only be about the moths themselves, with nothing regarding a chrysalis. But near the bottom, in a paragraph, detailed the life cycle. Sirius found what he was looking for. The chrysalis of the moth is highly valued due to its magical properties in potion making, while many wizards insist that freshly broken crystals are most poignant. Studies have failed to show any difference between fresh and preserved chrysalists, as both appear to hold the same properties when it comes to brewing potions. Ha! He exclaimed, delighted. I can't believe it. Mary, you're a bloody genius. This is exactly what I was looking for. He turned to her, grinning, only to find that she was much closer than he'd expected. He hadn't realized that she'd moved so much. Her chin was practically resting on his shoulder, and she had her hand on his knee. When did that got there? Mary smiled back at him, looking up through her lashes. She was wearing some sort of sparkly lip gloss that made her lips all shiny, and Sirius didn't know where to look. His brain kept screaming, like a siren, She fancies you! She fancies you! He was definitely supposed to do something, right? She was looking at him like she expected something. What did boys do when girls put their hands on their knees? Sirius thought about things the older boys in the Quidditch team said, repeating the whispers by James. Was he supposed to snog her? He remembered James mentioning a lot of snogging. But he wasn't sure if he was supposed to snog her. Her lips looked awfully sticky, and besides, he had no idea how that was even done. But wasn't he supposed to want to snog her? If a pretty girl put her hand on your knee, you should snog her, right? Was it weird that he just wanted to... Before his courage could fail him, Sirius leaned in quickly, pressing his lips to Mary's cheek. Her skin was warm and soft. She smelled nice, in an unobtrusive way, faintly sweet, floral. Sirius hoped he'd done the right thing. Was he supposed to say something? His stomach was one big knot. When he pulled away, Mary was blushing. Sirius was pretty sure that his own face was red. His cheeks felt hot. She kept grinning at him, not looking embarrassed at all as she said, "Well, you're welcome, I guess." This was followed by a breathless giggle, and his heart jumped in his chest as he felt her fingers squeeze his knee. She wasn't moving away. I have to go." He leapt to his feet, breaking away hastily as he gathered his things. "Thanks, Mary. You're the best." He didn't look back as he rushed out of the library, feeling as though his entire face was on fire. Sunday, the 11th of November, 1973. James agreed that they finally had enough information to approach Remus, but stubbornly insisted that they'd have to wait until the full moon that weekend. Sirius tried to change his mind, but he maintained that they shouldn't do anything that might cause their friend stress before his transformation, especially since they all knew how difficult the process was. On the full moon was a Saturday night, which meant Sirius spent the weekend feeling as though he was going to burst at the seams with their secret. Mary continued to eat at dinner with them, though they hadn't talked about the kiss. Sirius was trying very hard to avoid being alone with her again, since every time he saw her, his heart crawled like bile into his throat. On Sunday morning, Remus was in the hospital wing. They would have gone to visit him, but there was a Quidditch game. Gryffindor lost, putting James in a bleak mood. Once he'd changed out of his Quidditch pitch, he marched the other two Marauders into the library, where they spent the afternoon double-checking a few points of research and compiling the many sheets of parchment into one semi-cohesive stack. So it wasn't until that evening that James finally declared that they were ready to approach Remus. They rushed to the hospital wing, only to find out that Madame Pomfrey had already sent their friend back to the common room to rest. She admonished them not to wake Remus if he was sleeping, giving the boys a stern look as she sent them off. At the door to their dorm, James raised a finger to his lips. The door, when opened, revealed only darkness and silence, curtains drawn around Lupin's bed. Sirius bounced on the balls of his feet impatiently, hoping that his friend wasn't actually sleeping. He felt as though he might combust if he didn't say the word animagus in the next 10 seconds. "Moony?" James whispered, as they filed into the room. No response. They approached the bed quietly, and James tried again. "Psst, Moony, are you sleeping, mate? Are you sleeping, mate?" Another moment of silence, and there was a rustling noise and a deep sigh. "No." James pulled the curtains aside, and the Marauders climbed in to sit with their friend. We went to the hospital wing, but she said you'd already gone," James said, still speaking quietly. Remus gave them a reproachful look. "I came up after dinner. Where were you?" "Library." "How was it?" Sirius asked, forgetting his excitement momentarily, as he eyed the fresh bandage on his friend's arm. "The full moon and everything." "Okay." "It wasn't... you weren't cut up too much?" Peter asked anxiously. "A bit," Remus nodded. "Not too bad. What were you lot doing in the library?" "That's what we wanted to talk to you about," Sirius burst out, unable to contain himself any more. He felt like bouncing up and down on the mattress. "Sirius," James said sternly, giving him a meaningful look before turning back to Remus. "We were doing some research, and it's sort of about you." "Sort of?" Sirius scoffed. "It's all about you, Moony. I've wanted to tell you since last term, but James wouldn't. I just wanted to make sure we could do it." James elbowed him roughly. "Stop interrupting me. Bloody hell." "Remus, the thing is, ever since we found out about, your furry little problem, we've wanted to do something to help." "There's no cure," Remus cut in quickly. looking apprehensive and a bit wary. No, we know that, James assured him. But we thought there must be something we could do to make you stop hurting yourself, you know. We found out that normal werewolves don't do that, Peter butted in eagerly. So we... Normal? Remus looked offended. Not normal, Sirius kicked Peter. Others like you. Who don't get locked up during the moon. Right. So you're probably doing it to yourself because you're trapped and frustrated. Well, yeah, I knew that. Remus curled in on himself, scooting further away from them. He still had that wary, kicked dog look about him. Sirius hated it. But we thought if you had company... Obviously not human company, James interrupted him. Everything we've read says that if you even get near a human, then they're a goner. But animals, Sirius cried triumphantly. Other animals would be fine. He grinned as he said it, excitement like electricity in his veins. Remus blinked, uncomprehending. So what? I need a pet. James laughed. Sort of, but we thought we could be animals. Remus stared at him. Then he turned to Sirius, then Peter, looking at them all like they'd gone insane. You're going to be animals, he said flatly. Like McGonagall, Peter explained. Finally, a spark of understanding registered in Remus's gaze. But she's an animagus. You'd have to study and train and then get registered, and you can't even start until you're 17. Moony, Sirius tutted, shaking his head. We're marauders. We don't need to bother with all of that. Remus still looked sceptical. Even if you wanted to break the law, he looked at James pointedly as he said it. This isn't some school prank. It's serious magic. One of the hardest things to do. That's why we're telling you about it, Sirius leaned forwards. I wanted it to be a surprise, but James reminded us all that, well, it is bloody hard, so the more help we get, the better. Sirius examined them one by one. You really think you can do it, don't you? He asked slowly, not looking too sure. If you help us, James reassured fervently. We're the best students in the year, except for Evans. Don't see why we shouldn't try. And what if it goes wrong? Remus chewed his lips. What if I still, after the transformation, what if I can't tell that you're, what if I can tell you're not really animals? What if I go for you anyway? We'll test it, Sirius insisted. We'll test it over and over and over until we know it's safe. It's too risky. I know! He caught Remus's eyes and bored into them, trying to transmit every ounce of conviction and certainty that he felt. This was going to work. He'd make sure of it. Remus held his gaze for a moment and then took a deep breath. Let me think about it, please. He turned to James. Don't do anything yet. Just give me a few days. Okay, James agreed. That's fair. Sirius grinned, heart thumping with anticipation. Just think, Moony. Remus would say yes. Of course, he had to say yes. Once we've done this, there's nothing we can't do. We'll be unstoppable.